Hi, Bob Gruen here for Boomerocity.com. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about Iggy Pop, the godfather of punk. Now I gotta admit that the first time I saw Iggy Pop, he played at the Electric Circus here in New York. And I went there and it was kind of a empty, maybe about 50 people spread out over a big loft area. And Iggy was on stage with these bands and they were making noise and they looked weird. And I remember at one point he poured some oil on himself and he put glitter on himself. He was just jumping around like a madman. And I had seen a picture of Iggy standing on a crowd looking like a god. But in New York, he went to step off the stage and the audience just backed off, like, don't step on me, man. And I remember he hit the floor and I thought, didn't he hurt himself? He's wiggling around on the floor. And then he got up and he started pushing people around. And I remember reading in Legs McNeil's Please Kill Me, Jim Carroll talks about it. I had the same kind of experience as me where he was standing there and suddenly Iggy was pushing people around. He said, don't push me, man, I'll push you back. And so I remember coming out of that thinking that Iggy was kind of a really weird act. And I didn't really know what that was all about. But then a couple of years later, he was getting better. He was in Berlin for a while with David Bowie, and he came back and did a tour with David Bowie as his piano player. And David Bowie was a huge star, so it was kind of weird to have kind of an up-and-coming guy have a piano player, a sideman, who was one of the most famous musicians in the world. And I went to Toronto when they opened because Blondie was the opening act for the show, and I was pretty close to Blondie at that point. And I remember backstage asking Debbie if I could take a picture of her together with Iggy, and she asked Iggy, and Iggy came over, and we went into a side room, kind of like a bathroom. And usually they would just kind of stand there and pose together, but Iggy put his arm around Debbie and literally put his hand right down her chest and held her breast. And I was totally shocked and surprised. I mean, this is not something that I would do to a girl I didn't really know that well. But Debbie reacted by sticking her tongue out and starting to lick Iggy's chest, so I guess they got along pretty well. Anyway, that was the first time I really saw him in person. But then I think a year or so later, Debbie and Chris were at an awards ceremony. Coming out of the ceremony, I offered them a ride home, and they said, yeah, let's do that. But actually, then Chris remembered that Iggy was in a hotel around the corner. So we went over to visit him there. And that was the first time I sat in a room and talked to Iggy, and Iggy was talking to Debbie and Chris. And I remember him saying that he was a really nerdy guy in high school, that he was studious, that he read a lot, that he was a really smart guy. And then on stage, he just acted crazy and stupid. And then he did this kind of thing where he put his hand over his head and just went like that, which was a dumb thing to do, but he said every time he did it, the audience cheered. And from then on, Debbie started doing that, and every time she did it, the audience cheers. So I saw Iggy much more after that, and I started realizing he's the most intense performer, and just so exciting on stage. And then we had an opportunity one time, we were backstage with Iggy before the show, and we're talking to him. And when you talk to Iggy, he's not really Iggy. You're talking to him when he's not on the show. There's a guy named Jim Osterberg who's actually playing the role of Iggy Pop on stage. And when you talk to him backstage, you're actually talking to Jim Osterberg. So we're talking to Jim one afternoon, and it's getting ready for him to go on stage. And Art Collins, the manager, came over and kind of took me and my wife by the elbow and said, you might want to step away right now. And we did, and Iggy kind of went up against the wall, and he started getting into this thing and kind of transforming, almost like the way you see the Hulk in comic books. And he went from Jim Osterberg, nice guy, to this monster, and he came bouncing off the wall and ran for the stage and jumped up on stage and went totally nuts in front of the audience. And that's what Iggy does, and he does it a lot, and he does it so intensely that the audience gets really built up with it. I saw him one time in Japan, actually, on a hot summer night, and the audience was so intense that they were steaming, and it looked like there was smoke all over the crowd. And Iggy even pointed out, like, oh, you're all smoking out there, you know. But it was actually just the steam coming off the crowd. They were so hot. So I think the last time I saw Iggy a couple of years ago at the, was it the Plaza Theater here in New York? He was playing with Josh Homme. Had a great band. It was a really great show, as usual. And a lot of times at the end of the show, Iggy has people come up on stage and dance with him, but this time he came down into the audience and he was dancing up the aisle. And I was near the aisle, so I went down closer up to get a couple of pictures with a little pocket camera I had with me. And Iggy saw me and he grabbed me by the hand, and all of a sudden I was dancing with Iggy. And I was on this level of like intense jumping around and dancing. And then he let go about a minute later, and I went back to my seat. And all of a sudden I felt pains all over my chest and my back and my legs. For a second I thought I was having a heart attack. And then I realized that I just went from 0 to 120, going from sitting in the audience to suddenly Iggy energy. And Iggy energy is very, very high. So if you take Iggy's hand and start dancing, you better be prepared to dance. And I wasn't. Anyway, I love Iggy, and we love Boomerocity, and more power to you. Thanks for coming.